Slavery has existed throughout history, but none come close to the scale, brutality, and repercussions of the infamous Atlantic slave trade. Trade began in the 16th century and ended in the late 19th century. During this period, an estimated 12 million were captured and moved from all over Africa to West African ports. From here, they were traded to the Europeans and forced to journey to the Americas, many succumbing to the poor conditions and overloading. Africans that survived the journey were forced to endure a life of chattel slavery. Chattel gets its name from cattle. This kind of slavery literally means human cattle. It meant enslavement forever, to be treated as complete property, to be bought and sold legally. Any slave's children would be automatically enslaved. A culture of mistreatment, racism, and brutality created the worst kind of slavery on the planet. Tobacco, sugar, and cotton were new products to the market and hot in demand in Europe. And the recently discovered New World was the perfect destination for production, especially in the tropical areas of America. Some Europeans traveled to the New World, and many more European prisoners of war were forced to provide free labor. The Portuguese began trading in ports of West Africa in a small-scale capacity, shipping slaves to Spanish colonies in the Americas. The local population of America was not enough to create a large workforce. Many indigenous Americans were enslaved. However, the population of these people rapidly declined after the arrival of European explorers. The natives had limited immunity to many common diseases imported from Europe. Colonists started to change from tobacco to sugarcane production, requiring a lot more manpower and expensive mills. After the English Civil War in 1660, the flow of enforced labourers from Europe had dried up. European labourers had spread news to Europe about the horrific conditions, the hard work, the bad housing, and high mortality in the primitive and completely male pioneer societies in the colonial Caribbean. This started a large decline in immigration from Europe. The English finally began to trade slaves, and later the French, Dutch, and Danish West Indies followed suit on a large scale. Over this period of time, the Atlantic slave trade started to take shape. Europe would trade guns, cloth, iron, alcohol, and other materials to Africa in exchange for slaves. They would be forced to travel to America to produce sugar, cotton, tobacco, and to be traded back to Europe. Over the years, the scale of this trade increased. The largest period of slave trade was between 1700 and 1800, trading around 5.5 million slaves over this period. This is approximately 48% of slaves traded in total, before it ended in the late 1800s. Many forms of servitude had long existed in African societies. There was no single form of African slavery. However, Africa had long established slaving systems that connected across the Sahara and Nile River. The coming of European traders changed the direction of indigenous African slavery. Economic incentives for warlords and tribes to engage in the slave trade promoted violence and war. An arms race began in Africa. Europeans formed alliances with leaders, providing them with the weapons to attack rival African communities in return for captives. Widespread turbulence and upheaval resulted from the demand for slaves. The slave trade stimulated a large increase in slavery within Africa itself. Constant and unpredictable violent attacks and kidnapping clearly had a profound and damaging impact on African populations that were victimized by the slave trade. Many African communities tried to defend themselves from slave traders and raiders by arming or even trading slaves themselves. Elsewhere, states collapsed under the pressure of violent slave trading and extreme population loss. Males were primarily captured and shipped to the Americas. This has resulted in a shortage of men and skewed sex ratios in many parts of Africa. Researchers believe this is an explanation for why polygyny, also known as the practice of men having multiple wives, is prevalent in parts of West Africa today. The study by Botocci and Dimiko takes the analysis one step further and shows that the greater prevalence of polygyny has led to an increase in HIV rates across Africa. The study also suggests that a culture of distrust has been created within communities. This is a direct result of the insecure environment of the the slave trade, where it was common to experience the betrayal of others, even friends and family. Greater distrust developed, which could persist over generations, further isolating communities. You most likely already know that the African continent is the poorest in the world, but did you know that Africa has the top 12 poorest nations in the world? We wait to number 13, Haiti, before we have a non-African country. There is also a direct correlation between poverty in African countries today and the volume of enslavement from different areas during the transatlantic slave trade. Of the top 12 poorest countries in Africa and the world, 10 of the 12 countries being large-scale victims to the slave trade. The injustice of the slave trade still continues today, and I am certain that Africa would be a better place today if slavery did not exist.